My grandson smelled like motor oil and fear when I pulled him out of that basement. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not the darkness, not the zip ties, the smell. Like he'd been sitting next to an old lawnmower engine for days. I don't know why that's the thing that broke me open, but it did. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter much for this story. What matters is that I'm 53 years old. I've worked HVAC my whole adult life. I raised my daughter mostly alone after her mother passed, and I genuinely thought that I had done everything right. You work hard, you stay present, you show up. I showed up. Every soccer game, every school play, every Thursday night dinner, even after she got married and had her own life. I showed up. Her name is Nora, my daughter. She's 31. She married a man named Gil about 4 years ago. Gil Stanhope. He sold commercial real estate and drove a truck that was too clean for someone who actually used it. I never loved him for her, but you don't say that. You smile at the wedding. You help them move into the house. You hold your tongue because it's her life and she's an adult. And maybe you're just a protective father seeing problems that aren't there. Their boy is 7. His name is Eli. Eli has my mother's eyes, this pale gray green that catches light in a way that makes you stop mid-sentence. He's the kind of kid who asks questions about everything. Why does ice float? Why do dogs circle before they lie down? Why do grown-ups say fine when they don't mean it? That last one, he asked me about 6 months before all of this happened. I laughed and told him it was complicated. He looked at me and said, "That's what people say when they don't want to explain." 7 years old. I drove to their house that Saturday because Nora had called Thursday night sounding off. Not upset exactly, just flat. Nora's never flat. She's one of those people who has a specific laugh for specific things, a whole vocabulary of sighs, a way of pausing before a sentence that tells you exactly what kind of sentence is coming. On Thursday, she sounded like someone had turned the volume down on her. I asked if everything was okay. She said everything was fine. I thought about what Eli said. That's what people say when they don't want to explain. I knocked on the front door at 11 Saturday morning. Nobody answered. I could hear the television inside, some home renovation show, the kind that plays in the background of every house in America on a weekend. I knocked again. Nothing. Their garage code hasn't changed since they moved in. I punched it in, let myself through the side door into the kitchen, called out Nora's name. The house was warm in a way that felt wrong for a Saturday in October. Stuffy, like the windows hadn't been opened in days. "Hello?" I called again. Gil came around the corner from the hallway looking like I'd caught him at something. That's the only way I can describe it. His face did a quick calculation, reset, smile, casual lean against the doorframe. In about half a second. Most people wouldn't have caught it. I've known Gil for 4 years. I caught it. "Hey, Walt," he said. They called me Walt. Short for Walter, which is my father's name and not mine, but it had somehow become the thing they called me and I'd never corrected it. "Didn't know you were coming by." "Called Nora Thursday," I said. "Wanted to check in." "Where is she?" "Running errands." "She'll be back later." I nodded like that was a normal answer. "Where's Eli?" Something moved behind his eyes. "At my sister's place. Sleepover." Now, I want to be careful here, because I've been over this moment 100 times in my head. There was nothing overtly wrong about what he said. Kids have sleepovers. The answer came quick, but not suspiciously quick. Everything Gil said was technically the kind of thing that gets said in houses all across this country on a Saturday morning. Nothing he said should have made the hair on the back of my neck do what it did, but it did. I said I'd wait for Nora. He said she might be a while. I said that was fine, I'd have some coffee. He couldn't tell me to leave without it being a thing, and we both knew it, so he moved into the kitchen and started making coffee, and I sat at the island and we talked about nothing, football, weather, some road construction on Route 9, while my brain ran a separate conversation underneath all of it. Eli's shoes were by the back door. Both of them, the kind with the Velcro straps he always wore because he hadn't quite gotten the hang of laces yet. I noticed them when Gil turned to get mugs from the cabinet. You don't leave for a sleepover without shoes. I know that sounds like a small thing, but I've packed overnight bags for children. You might forget a toothbrush. You don't forget a toothbrush. You don't forget shoes. I drank the coffee. I said it was good. I asked to use the bathroom, went down the hall, listened. The house was quiet in a way that houses with children in them are almost never quiet. Even absent kids leave a kind of noise, toys on the floor, a half-done drawing on the coffee table, the particular frequency of a space that belongs partly to a small person. I walked back to the kitchen. Can I see the backyard? I said. I was thinking about your drainage situation last time I was here, with the rain we've been getting. It was a reasonable thing for me to say. I'd mentioned their yard drainage before. Gil looked at me for a moment. That calculation again, faster this time, and said sure, of course. The backyard was just a backyard, but the door to the basement was in the backyard, one of those old-style slanted cellar doors set into the foundation. Nora and Gil had always kept a padlock on it. There was no padlock on it that morning. There was a brand new sliding bolt instead, and it was thrown shut from the outside. I've installed HVAC equipment in a lot of homes. I've been in a lot of basements. The temperature around a foundation door on a cool October morning has a particular feel to it, slightly cold, slightly damp, the underground reaching up toward the surface. What I felt standing near that door was different. It was warmer than it should have been, and underneath the smell of wet leaves and yard mulch, there was something else. Something that made my stomach do a slow, cold roll. I turned around. Gil was standing closer than I'd realized, about 6 feet behind me. What's in the basement? I said. Storage, he said. Same as always. I looked at him for a long moment. He held eye contact, the way people do when they've practiced holding eye contact. I'm going to open this door, I said. Walt, I'm going to open this door right now, Gil. I threw back the bolt. The smell hit me first. Closed air, sweat, the sharp chemical note of urine, something organic and wrong underneath all of it. The stairs went down into darkness, and I took them fast, my hand hitting the light switch on the wall from memory. I'd been down here twice before, helping them move a freezer, and the single bulb blinked on. Eli was in the far corner. He was sitting on a folded, moving blanket, his wrists zip-tied to a metal shelving unit bolted to the wall. There was a strip of duct tape across his mouth, but he'd worked the edge of it loose, just barely, and when the light came on, those gray-green eyes found me, and I saw something happen in them, something I don't have a word for. Like a window being thrown open in a room that had been sealed for a long time. I crossed the room in about 2 seconds. I got the tape off his mouth first, as gently as I could, and he made a sound, not a word, just a sound, like his lungs were remembering how to work. Then I looked at the zip ties and I didn't have anything to cut them, and I turned around and Gil was at the top of the stairs, and I said with a voice I didn't recognize as my own, "Get me scissors, right now, get me scissors, and then you do not move from that spot." He brought scissors. I don't know why he brought them. I've asked myself that many times. Maybe because part of him knew it was already over. Maybe because some part of Gil Stanhope, underneath whatever this was, wasn't able to watch me look at him the way I was looking at him and tell me no. I cut the zip ties. I held Eli against my chest. He was shaking hard, the way you shake when you've stopped yourself from shaking for a long time and finally don't have to anymore. I held him, and I told him I was here, and I told him he was safe, and those were the only 2 things I knew how to say. "Is anyone else down here?" I said against his hair. He pulled back and looked at me. Shook his head. "How long have you been here, buddy?" He thought about it. "Since Thursday," he said. Thursday night Nora had called me sounding flat. I carried Eli up the stairs. Gil had backed away from the doorway and was standing in the yard with his hands in his pockets, watching us like he was watching something that was happening to someone else. I looked at him and I felt something I felt maybe twice in my life, a rage so clean and so cold it was almost peaceful. "Where's my daughter?" I said. "She's at her mother's," he said. His voice was completely calm. In Tucson. She's been there since Wednesday. We had a fight. She needed space. You're going to call her right now. You're going to call her while I call 911, and you're going to stand right there, and you are not going to move. He called. I called. Eli sat on the back step, and I crouched next to him and kept my hand on his back and felt his breathing slowly even out. Nora was in Tucson. That part was true. They had fought. About money, about Gil spending, about some financial thing I only understood pieces of later. She had taken the car and driven to her aunt's place and hadn't told me because she was embarrassed and because she thought she'd be back before the weekend. She had no idea her son was in that basement. I want to be very clear about that. She had no idea. The police came. 2 cars first, then more. Gil was arrested in my daughter's backyard on a Saturday morning in October. He didn't fight it. He stood there while they cuffed him, still with that expression like he was watching it happen to someone else. What came out over the following weeks was this. The money thing Nora and Gil had fought about was the reason for all of it. Gil had been taking money from a joint account they'd set up for Eli's college fund. Not a little. Almost $40,000, moved in increments small enough that Nora hadn't caught it for over a year. She'd found out Wednesday, confronted him, and he panicked. He put Eli in the basement, his own son, as leverage, as a way to keep control of what happened next. To keep Nora from going to lawyers, going to the bank, going to police. That's the part that still doesn't fit in my head, no matter how many times I turn it over. He put his 7-year-old son in a basement with zip ties and duct tape and a moving blanket to protect a real estate fraud. That's the kind of thing where the math never adds up, where you keep thinking you must be missing a piece. Because surely no one decides that's the move. Surely there's something else that explains it. But there wasn't. That was it. Money. Fear. A man who had never in 4 years shown me who he actually was. Nora drove back from Tucson the moment I called her. 8 hours, almost no stops. She called me from the road twice, crying so hard I could barely understand her. I told her Eli was okay. I told her he'd eaten half a sleeve of crackers I found in Gil's kitchen, and he'd had 2 glasses of water, and he'd cried for about 20 minutes and then fallen asleep on my jacket in the back of the ambulance, and honestly, he'd looked like a kid who had survived something terrible and wanted it to be over, which was exactly what he was. She asked me if I had gotten there in time. I said yes. I said it without hesitation, and I meant it every time since. But at night, alone, I think about Thursday. I think about that phone call and how I heard the difference in her voice, and I nodded to myself and I said, I'll check in this weekend, not tomorrow, not first thing Friday morning. This weekend, I gave myself until the weekend. Eli was in that basement from Thursday night to Saturday morning. Roughly 36 hours, and I knew Thursday night that something was off. I knew it in my chest, the way you know things you can't fully explain, and I waited. I'll carry that. That's mine. I'm not asking for forgiveness for it, and I'm not asking anyone to tell me it wasn't my fault. It lives in me now, and I've learned to move around it the way you learn to move around furniture you bump into in the dark. You know it's there. You navigate accordingly. Gil was charged with felony child endangerment, unlawful imprisonment, and financial fraud. He pled guilty to avoid trial. He's serving time. I don't know exactly how much, and I've decided I don't need to. Nora filed for divorce before he was even formally charged. The financial stuff was complicated. There were lawyers, there were months of untangling what was hers and what was his and what was taken. But she got through it. She's resilient in a way that I think she got from her mother, not from me. Her mother would have been proud. I'm proud. Eli sees a therapist twice a week. A woman named Dr. Fielding who has an office with a big window and a basket of Lego on her coffee table. He's been going for almost 8 months now. He's doing better. He still asks a lot of questions. Why do people do bad things? Is our new house safe? Can doors lock from the inside? And Dr. Fielding says that's healthy, that's processing, that's a kid trying to make sense of the world by finding its edges. I think about him at 7 years old asking me why grown-ups say fine when they don't mean it, and I think maybe he was already doing that, already mapping the edges. I've started saying what I mean. Even the small things. If something feels off, I say so. If someone's voice sounds flat when it shouldn't be, I don't wait until the weekend. 36 hours is a very long time when someone needs you and you have already noticed that they do. There's one more thing. About 3 weeks after the arrest, I got a letter. From Gil. He'd sent it to my address. Not Nora's, mine specifically. I don't know how he got it, though I suppose it's not hard to find. The letter was 2 pages. He apologized. He explained. He used words like spiral and pressure and wasn't thinking clearly. He asked me, not Nora, me, if I would tell Eli that he was sorry. I read the letter twice. I stood at my kitchen counter and I read it twice, and then I folded it up and I walked to the backyard and I burned it in the old metal trash can I've used for yard waste for 15 years. I watched it until it was ash. I don't know what I would have said to him if he were standing in front of me. I've had the conversation in my head enough times that the words run together, but I know this. A man who puts a child in a dark basement with zip ties and duct tape and a moving blanket does not get to write himself a redemption in a 2-page letter. That's not how it works. Whatever spiral he was in, whatever pressure he was under, my grandson smelled like motor oil and fear, and that smell is something I will never be able to unknow. Eli is doing better. That's what I hold on to. That's the part I come back to when the rest of it gets heavy. He's doing better. He's in 2nd grade now. He's learning to tie his shoes, the real way, bunny ears, the whole thing. Last week he called me on Nora's phone just to tell me he'd done it 3 times without help. Grandpa, he said, I figured it out. I know, buddy. I know did. Illy's shoes were still by the back door when the police arrived. Both of them wind up neatly the way a kid lines up shoes when someone tells him to. That image has stayed with me longer than almost anything else from that day. Longer than the smell in the basement. Longer than the sound Gil's voice made when he ran out of things to say. Those small shoes, sitting there like everything was normal, while nothing was. I've been thinking about what it actually takes to see clearly. Not just look, but see. I looked at Gil for 4 years. I was at their house for holidays, for birthdays, for random Tuesday dinners when Nora made too much pasta. I sat across from him hundreds of times, and I saw what I expected to see because it was easier than seeing what was actually there. That's not a comfortable thing to admit, but it's true, and I'd rather say it plainly than dress it up. There's a version of this story where I trust my instincts on Thursday night and I'm at that house Friday morning. Eli spends 1 night in that basement instead of 2.5. I don't tell myself that to punish myself anymore. I told it to myself that way for a long time, and it didn't help anything. I tell it to myself now because I think it matters. The moments when something feels off, and you talk yourself out of it are the moments that cost you later. Your gut is not always right, but it is always worth listening to. Wisdom isn't knowing everything. It's knowing when to stop and pay attention. What Gil did was the act of a man who had spent years building an image while something very different ran underneath it. He was smart in certain ways. Smart enough to move money in small amounts. Smart enough to stay calm. Smart enough to calculate what he could get away with. But that kind of intelligence, cut loose from any real sense of right and wrong, doesn't hold. It curves back. Every careful move he made created a pressure that had to go somewhere, and in the end, it went somewhere unforgivable. The consequences didn't come from nowhere. They came from choices, one layered on top of another, until the whole structure collapsed in a backyard on a Saturday morning in October. Nora is the one who impresses me most in all of this. Not because she did anything dramatic, because she kept going. She drove 8 hours back from Tucson. She walked into a house that had become a crime scene. She held her son. She filed the paperwork. She found the lawyer. She showed up to every appointment and every hearing and every difficult conversation. She didn't have a map for any of it. She just kept putting one foot in front of the other. That's not a small thing. That's actually the hardest thing. Anyone can be strong when strength feels heroic. It's the ordinary, exhausting persistence, the getting up and doing the next necessary thing when you're running on empty, that actually moves a life forward. Eli called me last week about his shoes. About finally tying them on his own. I thought about those shoes by the back door for a long time after I hung up. The same shoes, different day. And I thought, this is how it goes. The things that broke you and the things that carry you forward are sometimes the exact same things, seen from the other side. You just have to stay in it long enough to reach the other side. I'm trying to stay in it.